Hello, and welcome to part 2 of our seminar, Getting to Know 3D Experience. Now, should you have any questions about the product or the services discussed in this presentation, please feel free to reach out through the contact information provided at the bottom of the screen. Thank you, and enjoy the presentation. Next up, we have Marc Young from XLM Solutions, and like I said, he's going to be talking about the implementation, best practices, kind of like how that process goes, data migration, that type of thing. So if you do decide to make that jump, and you have to get everything over, he's going to kind of go through that process for you. Again, if you guys have any questions, Marc's the man to ask for this type of stuff, so don't be shy. I'll let Marc take it from here.
All right, great. Well, hello. Like Michael said, I'm Marc Young with XLM Solutions. We're a partner of DI Squared and also a Dassault partner. And today, I'm going to be a little bit shorter because it is Friday afternoon. It's sunny out in Michigan. I'm going to just go over some general best practice options around implementation and data migration. Scott showed you a lot of cool and awesome stuff, but it's also, some of the things you need to think about is how to take an existing customer with their legacy data and legacy processes and then make all these beautiful things work within the 3D experience. So again, just to be clear, this will be a very high-level presentation, but we can always go into more details offline or answer questions as we go. So feel free to keep this an open conversation as well. Just a quick little bit about XLM Solutions. Like I said, we're a PLM solution provider. We've been in business since 2005, conducted many different successful projects across the world. I have a lot of combined experience around PLM, working with partners in North America like DI Squared and different industries as well. We've worked with customers from large Fortune 100 companies to small to medium-sized companies, so really seeing the gambit of different company sizes. We really pride ourselves for being highly respected in the PLM industry for being both business savvy and technical savvy, respected within the Dassault ecosystem, and myself and other key founders of XLM all came from Dassault itself. We're really dedicated to quality and excellence through continuous research, customer relationships, learning new technologies, being on the cusp of new technologies, what's out there, within Dassault and within data management and technology as a whole. And really we're covering the whole Dassault portfolio. So let's talk about some 3D experience implementations and best practices. So whenever we're starting an implementation, and even before you start, I would say even in the sales process, the planning process, etc., it's really understanding the scope of the implementation and agreeing on with the end customer what that scope is. The Dassault portfolio is huge. Here's a small screenshot, but here's a small list of all the various different products, roles, apps, etc. that are out there. So it can get really big. You saw in Scott's presentation all these different apps. So it's really important to understand what's that scope, what you're going to focus on. We really believe in a phased approach type of implementation. And when I say phases, let's start with small wins. You can do so much within the platform, but let's start with something simple, CATIA data management, and then grow from there, whether that be engineering change, bill of materials, quality control, requirements management. The list can go on and on. But we really believe in a phased approach, really getting the customer to, it works in a lot of ways because, you're understanding the customer's requirements and the customer is understanding the solution. So it helps to build in a gradual process that knowledge between both parties. And then when we talk about phased approaches or different ways to implement it, this goes more from an implementation point of view. There's different methodologies that can be used. So you hear a lot in software development, like agile methodology or waterfall methodology. I don't know if those mean anything to you guys. Nodding yes, so I'm not going to go into it, but you can do things where you deliver small pieces of functionality in smaller sprints, or you can say, let's define all this solution up front. Let's work on it for a full, for a bunch of months, and then deliver more of a full solution versus an agile solution. The other thing, is really important is to define what I say the project governance. So besides all the technical work, getting something like this to work, it's very important to have governance and the soft project management defined to make sure it works. So really, making sure there's a project manager involved that's managing the project, identifying key stakeholders within the project, who is going to act as an analysis, who's going to act as the technical expert, who's going to act as testing and validation, how these people play together and their different roles are set. So making sure that the different stakeholders are involved, and they both can be involved from functional roles like engineering, manufacturing, IT, but also from business roles like analyst, validator, tester, etc. Very important to set expectations within the user community and management. So, these implementations are challenging. I'm not going to lie to you. It takes effort and it takes time, and it's very important to set expectations that we are going to a new system. It is going to be improved, but like anything, it's going to get better over time. So when we roll out something, there still may be some issues with it, but understand we're going to be there to work with you to make sure it's working, and have management understand that yes, they're committed to the system, and if there is resistance from users, there's always resistance. People don't like to change. That you enforce the reason for change and why you're changing. I've heard someone say, we need to train and educate, which are different things. Where training is showing them how to use the new system, and educating them is why we're going to a new system. So that's important to do. And then, of course, IT involvement through the various aspects of the project. When starting a project, it's again, obviously very important to do an assessment up front to make sure you know what you're getting into, and that one assessment may be broken down into many different assessments. I always say PLM is a journey, so even if you do this great assessment up front, as you go through the project, things may change, and your initial assessments may change. But you got to start somewhere. And with any good plan, expect changes to it. But again, identify the stakeholders that will be involved. Work to map requirements to functionality. So, I said break this down to phases, but based on this phase, what are the key requirements that needs to be satisfied in this phase? And then how will the functionalities of the solution map to those requirements? Are there any gaps? If there are, then let's talk about customization, workarounds, etc. Make sure you have proper licenses. So this goes hands in hands in sales, and why it's very important to be sales and the implementer to have a strong partnership together, because the customer might say, I need to do X, Y, Z, and then you realize they bought a license for ABC. So you got to make sure that software licenses that were purchased map to functionality as well. And again, that goes to hands in hands with this assessment, why it's done, pre-sales or post-sales. Discuss data migration up front. We'll talk about data migration. That's the second half of the presentation. But besides these electrical car companies, most companies have legacy data and need that legacy data in their system. So always a key part of the project is getting that legacy data into the system, and don't just think of that as a second thought. Oh yeah, we need to get the data in. That should be something that is discussed and thought of, from the beginning of the project. And devil's always in the details. You're going to say it's easy to do ABC and we're up and running, and it's easy to say that, but when it comes down to the details, I want my part number to be 3 characters dash 5 characters dash a suffix based on the type of part it is. That's where the details come into play, and where the implementation comes into play to deliver those specific pieces of functionality. We've been to customers that had 20 different requirements just around part number, which is just one small part of a bigger picture. So it depends. Some customers are easy, they're straightforward, and others have very specific needs that we need to make the system work for. Project execution, this is a very high level plan of how we kind of see projects get executed. We talk about installing the infrastructure, server installs, the different modules, understanding the number of users, different locations where the data is at, so we can do an infrastructure assessment to figure out what servers you need, how much memory, do you need any load balancing, backup strategy, etc. But we can get the base product installed. We like to do core team training, and that's, again, the internal stakeholders involved in that implementation team, to give them a high-level overview of how the system works, so they're educated and can start talking the same language. Configuring the system based on the needs, customizing the system based on the needs if you can't do it with configuration, integrating the system possibly to other enterprise systems like ERP, data migration, and some of these go in parallel. They're not all series, even though they're listed like that. User acceptance testing, making sure that what you did works and can be validated. And usually there's some iteration with that, because test, find issues, realize maybe certain use cases weren't fully handled, and fix it, and then go through that cycle again. And then finally, go live with the system, and then go on to that next phase. What are your next phases to increase functionality within the system? Let's talk about data migration a little bit. So, like I said, usually a big part of any implementation is data migration. And a lot of times it's pushed off to the side. Oh yeah, we just need to get data from system A into system B. But again, data migration can really be a complicated aspect of the project. So with data migration, like anything, you got to analyze the data. So I kind of break it down into different areas to analyze. So first is, where is this legacy data coming from? Is it on a network share? Is it file or folder based? Is it coming from some legacy system, like a legacy PLM system that the company may have? Is it a commercial legacy PLM system or a homegrown system? Is it coming from I've had companies say we have this filing cabinet of 20,000 drawings and we want to scan everything and put it in the system. So sometimes the data is not even electronically available, and you got to convert it to electronic format. So there's different areas of where that data is coming from, and then there's different types of data. There's CAD data, there's metadata, which is just data. There's relationship data. There's different types of the data, etc. Office, could be different other file types. So data can be in all sorts of formats. And so understanding the type of data you're dealing with, which will help understand what will be involved in loading it. The next thing is access to the data. So can you get access to the system, the data? Is it on a network? Then the answer is yes. Is it in some proprietary system? And if so, do you have access to that system, or do you know how it works? Can you get to the underlying database, or do you need APIs to access the data? So those are some of the assessment things you need to do. Is all the data there? Could there be missing data? And if so, how would you address that? And what experts do you need to bring in to handle that? Can we do it? Does the company have internal experts, or maybe we have to bring in a third-party expert? Next we talk about mapping rules. So this is how's the data going to be mapped from the legacy system to the new system. Will the data be mapped to workspaces, folders, bookmarks, like Scott had showed, or could it be free floating in the system, not tagged to anything? Our attributes going to be mapped. We have part number in the legacy system. Should that go to a field called document number in the new system, or some other field? How the revisions are handled. Are revisions in the old system the same pattern or same sequence as you want in the new system, or does the old system have numeric revisions and the new system have alphabetic revisions? These are just common things we need to look at. Other logic. In old systems, and this goes back to legacy, I've seen on, companies had, description 1, description 2, description 3. And that was because the title block could only hold so many characters. But maybe going forward, you want to merge those 3 description fields into 1 description field. So you could have special mapping rules. And then finally, understanding the volume of the data and the time it takes to load the data. Usually when you do a data load, you have to shut down one system, and the system's down until all the data is loaded. So can the data be loaded? Can you afford that downtime, number one? What is that downtime going to be? And can that be reasonably done? A lot of times we can do it over a weekend, and it's not an issue. Sometimes it's so much data that it can't be done over a weekend. So then we might want to talk about delta loads, or breaking the loads into manageable chunks so that it minimizes downtime and doesn't affect production. And at the same time, this is even before the project starts, but roughing out what would be that cutover plan. How much downtime can we afford? If we're multiple, if the companies have multiple locations across the world, that window of downtime gets even smaller when you deal with time zones. So considering those aspects all go into what will be involved in understanding what to load the data. Also, with data migration comes data cleanup. I've never come across a company that had very, completely clean data. There's always issues with data, and the saying goes, garbage out, garbage in. So depending on how much effort companies want to spend on this, really will depend on, again, their requirements, their needs. But when you do data migrations, cleanup is always a part of it, or something that should be discussed. And various data cleanup things are, you have duplicate parts with the same part number. 2 objects, 2 files that share the same part number. Files that may have different part numbers but the same file name. Files that are the same but with different names. Maybe you have all this data out there, and you're going to assume part number is associated to every CAD piece of data you have. But what happens if you have CAD data without part numbers? What do you have relationships between CAD files? You have a drawing, and you have a model, but that link is missing. The drawing can't find the model for some reason. How do you want to handle that? You have assemblies that aren't pointing to the latest revisions of parts. You have non-conformance revisions or version schemes. You have data that's mandatory in the new system, but you don't have all that data filled in. So these are all different possible areas where you can run reports, check the type of data you have, and either write automatic routines if logic is there to fix it, or at least identify the data that's problematic and fix it, whether that's manually or some automatic way. So again, with data migration, we like to follow some processes, methodologies, and best practices. We believe in installing 3DEXPERIENCE out of the box. This will start giving you a feeling of how it works and how we can start mapping data without necessarily having the full configured system there. So we can start working on data migration while the system's still being configured. As I said, do the due diligence up front, review the legacy system, identify what data needs to be mapped or needs to be migrated, how is that data going to be mapped, identify any concerns with it, and what's the cutover plan. Obviously, a test environment should be in place to test the migration. Most likely, you'll do multiple data migration tests before you get all the kinks out. So again, expect an iterative process of configuring a migration, running a test, validating the data, seeing issues with it, fixing it, and then rerunning that process. I'm not getting into the different technologies out there that can be used to migrate data, but there are various technologies out there. So part of the assessment is to identify what technology to use to load the data, and you can have a whole hour session on the pros and cons of the different technologies out there. Data validation, again, it's very important to after you migrate data to validate it and make sure it works. And we believe that the customer is the best person to validate it. We definitely can run reports, create logs to identify issues, but we don't know the data as well as you, the end customer, knows the data. So definitely you should identify resources to be involved to validate and test the data migration. As mentioned, plan for a production rollout, set user expectations, in various ways. So from end users' point of view, let them know way in advance. The system is going to be down on Friday, and you're going to be in the new system on Monday. Make sure they're going to be trained, before that happens. From an IT point of view, make sure any software that needs to be rolled out to the end users is rolled out, during that time. And obviously make sure the people involved in the data migration are available and ready and set to do what they need to do. And then finally, you're going to run your production migration, and if you do all the work up front, running the production migration should be relatively straightforward and painless. So in conclusion, we say with proper planning and testing, implementing and migrating to data to 3DEXPERIENCE can go smoothly. The devil's always in the details. Make sure to fully understand your requirements, data sets, limitations, technologies being used, throughout the project, and most importantly, set the right expectations. You're not going to be able to assess every single possible detail up front. Some of this is as you go, and as you experience the solution, you're going to make changes, define things. You might be going down one path and realize that we slightly want to go down a different path. So it really is a journey. And finally, say anything is possible. Most implementations and data migration scenarios can be accomplished in a relatively straightforward manner. But there's always the exceptions to the rules, and then it just takes a little bit more effort and customization, thinking out of the box to make it happen. But most things can be done relatively straightforward. So with that, I'd say thank you and any questions.